Hello, I'm Mark Benison, and this is 3D platformer tutorial looking at pickups using Unity. So that's collectibles and such like. I want to create a system that I'm hoping can be expanded later. It's adapted from a variant of the system where I used scriptable objects, and I believe this could be adapted in a similar way without scriptable objects, or otherwise extended to use them later on. Hopefully at the beginning of an item-based system as well. We're not doing inventories and such at this point, but the idea is it would be built up into that later. It's something that's going to focus on pickups, collectibles, for now. So let's get started. Okay, so this is a solution I've created previously. I've got a player, I've got an enemy in there. You could use your own system. The idea is I'm trying to make something that is relatively modular. So you could plug this into your own system. I'm going to set up my assets folder in the project pane by creating a new folder. This one's going to be called item system. And within it, I need 3 subfolders. Materials, prefabs, and scripts. We can create a script straight away called item. And we can set this up straight away. For now I don't need the start and update, we can always add them back in at a later time. A lot of this stuff I'm not actually going to use right now, but again I'm setting this up with the intention that it could be extended later, although someone else might want to extend it later. The first thing, a game object, item prefab. The idea here is that if this existed purely in code, such as if you had it in an inventory system, and you wanted to place it down on the ground as a player, and you go, I want to take it out of my inventory and place it down, you need to instantiate it, and you'd have to do that from a prefab. So I'm creating a game object prefab so that could be passed in and it could be used, but I'm not going to set that part up here because I'm not creating an inventory system. On the same basis that I'd want to have some icon, some image to use in an inventory system, I'm setting that up too, but again, not going to likely use it. I've set these all up as public, which is a really bit of a sin. And what I should have done is set them all up as private and set them as serialized field. I was being a bit lazy for the purposes of this. By all means, you go ahead and make them all serialized field and get rid of the public keyword. Every item I feel should have a name, so item name and a description, and the attribute text area 4x16 is just for the inspector to have a larger than usual area for text. So this could be arrow, and the description could be a wooden arrow with a metal tip, or whatever you want it to be. This is something you could use to do as tags when you hover over the item with a mouse, maybe in the game, or again, if you hover over it, or if it appears in a inventory system, you might want a little picture to the side of what it is. If your inventory system that you later have has a weighting system to it, perhaps you can carry capacities, then you can use the weight value. Otherwise, I will hard set all these to 0 and they won't have weight and we won't use it. If your system has a stackable element to it, the idea here is to say how much can you stack, how many of these items are in this one object. This can be whether it's on the ground and you're picking multiple quantities up, or it can be if it's in the inventory. So it exists both in a abstract sense, that's in the inventory, or in a physical, it's in the scene world. By default, every item is just going to be 1. If it's an object that you can pick up, it's typically 1, but some things like arrows or coins, you might want to stack them. So it has a default of 1, and the max stackable quantity is how many can be stacked there, which again is 1. So if you had arrows, you might say, oh, I've got 7 arrows on the floor, but you can stack up to 100 of them. And you could set the quantity to 7 and the max stackable quantity to 100 in that situation. Again, defaulted to 1, because if you have a gun, it doesn't stack, and there's only 1 when you find them. The next two things, again, are linked to if we have a inventory system, and is it storable? Is it something that can be put in your inventory? Otherwise, if it's something like coin on the floor and you go over and you want to be able to pick it up like rings in Sonic, and you just pick them up and it adds a points value or adds to your coin intake, then it's not storable. We'll set it to false, so that's its default, and the item will be used when it's picked up. So whatever its use function will be, we'll do that. If it is storable, we won't use it. Instead, we'll store it on pickup instead. And then if you want to use it, you'll have to go in the inventory and use it that way, presumably. The next question is it a consumable item? Is it like a health kit that when you do use it, it'll be destroyed? Now, this really depends on if it's storable, because the assumption is that if it's not storable, then it will probably be used on pickup. I suppose you can make it so it isn't, but the idea is if it is storable, I was thinking along the lines of, then is it consumed? If it's a health kit, it will be consumed, but it could be an item that you can use, and then maybe it has a cooldown timer, or maybe it's something you can continue to use as much as you want. They're the basics, I say, but you might want to add more in, probably a bit more than basics if I'm honest. It gets us started. Very few of this I'm actually going to use, but let's create a public void interact. I made it public so it's accessible from other subroutines. This really is important that it's accessible. In fact, I'm going to change all these. You can stack attributes and they'll still apply to the one below. This should still show up here in the inspector, and by all means we could check this. I don't have an item yet, so I'll have to check it once I've added it in. Let's do a debug log. We're going to do this a few times. I'm just going to copy that text blank, and so it's easy to paste later. Picked up. Might as well say state what we've picked up. Now, if you do a transform.name, transform is attached to the object we've got here, so this code will be attached to the item, and when we press interact, it's going to look for the transform property and find the name attached to it, i.e. the name that's in the inspector. We'll get output that name. When we interact, we can ask the question, is this storable? If it is, let's run a store subroutine that doesn't exist yet. Sorry. IntelliSense sometimes gets ahead of itself. Otherwise, we'll use it. So if it's storable, which we've set to false, so by default it should just be used when we interact with it. But otherwise, if it's if storable is true, then it'll store instead. Let's create void store and void use. We'll do another debug.log. We have the store storing and using text appear, and in theory, one of these is going to run if we interact, because this is either true or it's not. I don't have to do an else if. If it's not true, then it's assumed to be false. Back to the store. If we're storing it, we need to do an inventory system, which is out the scope of this tutorial, but we will destroy the object to get rid of it in any event. I want to focus on using, so I'm focusing on setting that is storable to false and keeping it that way. And we'll say we're using the item, and then ask the question, well, okay, let's just check, is it consumable? Which I said was really designed for if storable's true, but you know, let's assume now that we'd use it in any case. If it's consumable, we need to deduct the quantity. So I'm assuming that the quantity might be more than one. If there's a series of arrows on the floor, we might just want to, using it will pick up 1 in this situation. But if it's a stack of health kits, it'd only use 1, and you might want to use more. And you can decide how you want to set this up. Instead of deducting 1, and by the way, minus minus is the same as writing. In the same way that quantity plus plus is quantity equals quantity plus 1, quantity minus minus is the same as saying quantity equals quantity minus 1. And another quicker way of writing it is minus equals 1, but if it's only 1 you are adding or deducting, simply minus minus or plus plus is more succinct. And if we're using, we'll use 1 and the quantity deduct, and if the quantity is less than or equal to 0, we'll destroy it. For what we're doing, we'll probably only have 1 in the stack at any one time. That's what we've set it to as default values, so it should always be less than or equal to 0, and so we should always destroy the object. It gives us some scope to extend this and do more with it later, and by we, I mean you. We'll need some more code, but this is all the item needs, and that's quite a lot going on just for that. Quite a little actually going on when you look at it, but a lot of scope to extend that. I'm going to close down these fields from last time, these scripts files from last time, sorry. Right, let's create an object. In the same way that I've created other objects, if you've seen any of the other tutorials, I've created an empty first. And then within that, let me just set the values to be 0, 0, 0. I'm going to offset it by 5. I want the Y value to be 0 because I want it grounded. And anything inside of it, I want to zero out to its local position. I'm going to insert a cylinder, which is going to be my model. I'm going to call it coin model. And again, this could be swapped out for an actual coin that you've maybe made in 3ds Max or Maya or Blender or anything else that you use. I want to have it float up a little bit. I'm setting its position to 0, 1, 0. I'm setting its rotation to be 90 and 45. And I'm going to set its scale to be 1, 0.1, and 1. And really all I'm doing is shrinking its 8. Obviously that's rotated. It's going to look like that. Now it needs a collider, and it's got a collider, and it's got capsule collider. Capsule colliders, as the like small as they can get, it becomes more spherical. So I could actually just use a sphere collider. In any event, this collider is on the coin model, not the gold coin. I'm going to remove that component, the capsule collider, from the model. And this is something I suggested last week about maybe I need to remove it off the enemy model, which I had, which I probably should have done, but I didn't, and add it really to the enemy. But I didn't do that, so we'll go with what we've got. It worked, the code there, so I'll keep this. In gold coin, I'm going to add a collider here. I can either add a, I mean, you could actually add a box collider. Don't add anything with 2D at the end. I could add a capsule collider, which was what was originally there, or because of the size and shape of this, I'm going to use a sphere collider. Its radius is 0.5, so it's got a width of 1, a diameter of 1. Its center position, though, you'll notice, is in the ground, and that's because it defaults to 0, 0, 0 origin. If I set that to 1, it should float in the same way that the model does, and it's wrapped around the model where I want it to be. So I've just looked at the model's position and positioned it appropriately. You can increase the radius if you wanted to get close to it, if you wanted to be able to interact with anything outside of it as a wider area. Just bear in mind I can interact, if I come under the angle, I can interact with it wherever that sphere is, so I can interact with the sides here. You might decide you don't want it to work that way, and then you can look at a different model. You could do a box, but that will have, you can have it fit more neatly, but the corners, you better interact with it there. But that's not a big problem with what we're looking for. I don't mind a little bit of extra room to be able to work with, so even if you increased it, that was supposed to be 0.7, increased it a little bit, that's not a big problem as far as I'm concerned. I'm quite happy with it as 0.5 though. 0.5, not 5. There we go. Let's create some materials, shall we? Oh, before I do, to show you what happens. This trigger is set to false on the collider. So I can't walk through it, which is annoying for an object that I don't want to interfere with my movement. So if I set is trigger to the gold coin, play. I can walk through the object. Really useful if you want the is trigger to actually trigger some code. So if you want to walk into it and it picks up when you walk over it, you can add code to do that. On this occasion, I'm actually making it so you have to choose to interact. You have to press a button on it. Kind of like if you went in a typical RPG game, you go over to an item, you don't just pick it up when you walk over it. You have to often press like F or, depending on what controller you've got, there's a key to do it. Right, materials. Great, material, gold. I want to create 3 materials. Silver. Imagine you can guess what the last one's going to be. Bronze. I set the gold to be yellowish. I don't like it perfect bright yellow, slightly off yellow. Bronze, I typically go for more of a orangey colour. Sometimes yellowish orange. And silver, typically go for grey, but I do quite like a hint of blue in it. Now, I'm not quite ready with these. I want to set them metallic. I can actually highlight all of them, and I can set their metallic to be 0.758 to 0.8. And then you can see what they look like at the top, quite small. Make sure the bronze looks different to the gold. I'll make the silver a little lighter. Keep it a hint of blue still. And you can try them out. If you get in the right lighting conditions. Just wondering if the gold and the bronze look too similar. I'm a bit happy with that. Okay. I'm happy to stick with gold, but I've got a few materials if I want to make variations. If I take the gold coin and drag it into our prefabs, we have a gold coin prefab, I can drag that out, and because this is an instance, I can actually decide here now to make the alternative a different color. The only thing is their name is gold coin. I could maybe change the name to just coin, and then it's the instances that are various differences. If I was doing that, each one would have a different value attached, but I'm not quite finished, so I'm going to delete these. Now, I've done this before I've added my script, and that causes a problem. I want to show you. Minimize that. If I drag my script on, my script is added, you'll see this little plus sign. And the issue is if I drag another coin on, the new coin doesn't have that script. The issue there is I need to add the script to the prefab. If I add it to the prefab now, it'll have 2 scripts called item because it'll have this one which has been added in plus the one that the prefab has. So I need to remove that. And if I go to the top here, it says prefab open, and I can use that, or I can go to the prefabs here and double click it. If you double click it, you'll have a blue background. Otherwise, if I click here and go open prefab, it'll grey out the background. But the idea is now I'm in the prefab itself. And now if I were to drag in the scripts, apologies, I moved. And then I come out of that. Tell you what, before I come out of it, I'm going to drag the gold coin into the prefab just so it's there. And that's the weird part of this. Gold coin is going to reference itself from the prefabs. But that's what it's going to do. And I can look at the values. I do want it to be not storable at this point. If it was storable, I'd click that and change some values around. So I can tweak this, but I don't want anything stackable or anything like that. I'm quite happy with how it is defaulted. I suppose I'll just give it a name, gold coin. Come out of the prefab by going back to scenes here. And now when I drag in another prefab, it has the same description and everything on it. So I could actually create multiple prefabs to different coins, or I could have one prefab and just change the values. If I was changing the values because I might have lots of coins in lots of different parts of my game, honestly, I'd probably just have different coin prefabs ready set up, or otherwise I'd have some sort of drop-down menu so I could swap it out and have the code decide what those configurations are going to be. This is where scriptable objects actually are really cool, because you could just create the scriptable objects for each thing that you're going to have and configure it appropriately. Okay, I'll delete that prefab. I don't want it in right now. I just want to get this one working. I need to add some code to the player because I've got some stuff here, but it doesn't do anything yet. So let's get our player object, and we're going to create a new script for this. I want to call it interactor. Now the question is this a player script? That should go under player scripts. Yes, it is, but I'm going to put it in our item system because it's a script that's related to that. I might regret that decision, but it's where I'm putting it. So the interactor is going to be the player, the person who can interact with things, or the object that can interact with things. So let's get started. Okay, so I need to know what camera we're using, so we're going to use a transform for that. I need to know the location of the camera and which direction it's facing. So basically, what's the camera? I've got multiple cameras I'm using. I don't just have the main camera, so I can't just hard-code that in the start. I'll have to be able to look at it on the fly and determine which one it is. We want to need a layer mask, and for this, we need to make sure that our player has a layer. So let's do that first. My player does have a layer because I set one. Also, while I'm on the subject, your actor camera will need to have the main camera tag. Now that one's not used, but I've got a first person camera in here. That's set to main camera. A third person controller in here, which is also set to main camera. And it swaps between them depending on which one I'm using at the time. Max distance from camera is the distance at which I want to be able to select things and interact with them. And this is the distance from the camera, not the distance from the player. And I'm making the distinction because in a third person game, I might want to be able to pick up things that are within a certain range of the player. And the distance from the camera to that object might be different. So I have a distance from the camera, I want to be able to interact with things, 10. And the distance from the player is going to be 3. So it's going to check that they're both true. Whatever the distance from the player is, I'm calling the player the actor. That's what that value is going to store. Let's find out what our layer mask is. The layer mask is not simply taking a layer. The layer mask works more as a sort of bitwise operation. I'm not going to get into that. Basically, what we need to do can actually be a number of layers. You can actually use a range. And I'm going to use a layer mask dot get mask. And I can pass into it an array of strings. That just means separate your strings by commas, and that'll give you an array of strings. And if you just have the one, just insert the one. The problem is it does want strings. Now if I do GameObject.layer, that is an integer. And you can't just simply go, I'll have the layer.name or anything like that. So I'm not aware of whether there's a get layer name. Don't think there is. As such, what you could do instead, two options. You can simply type in player and hardcode it in, and that will work. Or otherwise, you can say layer mask, capital L for this, dot layer to name, and pass in the game object dot layer there. What that'll do is it'll pass in the number, which I think mine is set to 6. It will then convert that into the name, which for mine is player, and if yours is set up differently, such as players and has an S on the end or something, whatever yours is named, it should pass that in. It'll put it in the mask and close the extra bracket. Semicolon. Now, what that does is it passes that in to say they're the layers we're talking about. Now, a mask really wants to be the opposite of those. I want to say I don't want those layers, and what currently it's doing is it's setting to only see those layers. So I need to invert it, and the way I can do that is put the tilde sign before that statement. So another way of writing it, if you'd rather hardcode in, would be that there, and just put it in player. Again, you need the tilde. It's later. On update, I want to run interact. IntelliSense. So that doesn't exist yet. Let's create it. I'm running a keyboard and mouse game here, so I'm going to use the F key for my interact. And this is where, again, I don't like to hard code all these keys in. You could use the input manager, the defaulted one, or you can use the new system. By all means, do. I want to look at setting up a key system at some point, a control system at some point, so they can easily swap out controls. The player can customize it, has options then of controllers and things and all that. But I want to look at that at a later date and go through all that differently later. For now, I'm just going to hard code it into BF, and you can swap it out to be something you'd rather have it coded to. My actor camera, which I created, I'm going to set it to be the camera.main.transform. So it's going to get the transform of whichever current camera is the main camera. It has to have a main camera tag, and that's why I said keep an eye out for that. Because I've got multiple cameras, first and third person in particular, I want to output which camera I'm using, just make sure it's using the right one. That's what that's going to do. We'll create a new RAID ready for our RAIDcast. It's going to use the camera's position and the camera's forward location for that. Our RAIDcast will use that ray, and if it hits something, it's going to try and return that as RAIDcast hit of type RAIDcast hit. It's only going to travel as far as this distance we've set up here, which is 10F, which is how far from the camera it's going to look. And I'm going to ignore anything on this layer, and this layer should be the player's layer, so it should ignore the player. So when you're setting that layer and it says, do you want to allocate everything inside of this object to be on this layer? You can say, yes, I do, because I want everything inside this layer to be ignored. Again, we're doing this check where we're saying if the RAIDcast that we've returned, this RAIDcast hit object we've returned, doesn't have a transform, then it's null, therefore we're not going to run this. If it does have a transform, so it's not null, so that means it does have one, we'll run the code that we want to run. So this is an extra little check. Vector3.distance will return a float value based on two positions, two vector3s. They've got the transform.position, which is whatever this code is attached to, which should be the player. And we've got the object that we've hit. So when the camera's hit an object, that we know that object is within 10 units of the camera. How far away is it from the player? And that's what we don't know. So that's what this will return. Just to make sure that we're going to check that this value now is going to be within 3 units, i.e. our max interactable distance. If the distance from the actor is less than or equal to our max interactable distance, which is 3, we'll return the text in range, and we'll also pass back the name of the object we've hit. So what's in range, the name of the object we've hit, and then we'll append onto that space and then a bracket. We'll return the distance from the actor. I'll come back to that, and we'll close bracket. I've done this before and it's not producing any errors, but strictly speaking I should convert this to a string, was my feeling. But I can also format that string, should I choose to be 2 decimal places, and that's what that will do there. That will format our float value, whatever value it is, it will format it to a 2 decimal place system. Happy with that. That's just for debugging purposes. So we're going to define an item called item. Item is what we've created here. We want to define and instantiate, if you like, an item. Well, whether we instantiate it will depend whether we can find one. So with the item we've hit, we're going to go to transform and use the get component, which looks through all of its components. Which are these things? Transform, sphere collider, and item script. If it finds something that is of type item, which it will if it's a gold coin, it will return that in the field we created called item, in the field called item, in the variable. If I hit something else that doesn't have item, then item will be null. Item will be null if it doesn't have it. And this if statement won't run, because what we're looking at here is if it's not null, if it does have something. So if we hit something that has an item property, brilliant, we've found something we want to hit, then we can run item.interact. if you followed along with the tutorial looking at shooting enemies, we instead used a send message upwards and could run a private subroutine that way within a class, if it existed. This is a bit different, and there's a bit more error catching going on with this, because if it doesn't exist, it's going to produce an error. What it's going to try and do is run the interact script, which is this one, which we set to public. Otherwise it wouldn't come up as an option. And for that item, it's going to have all the same values that was set for the item that we've touched. It should run the use on this occasion, and it should remove itself because it's only got quantity of 1. It should give us two things. It should give us picked up and the name, which will be gold coin, and then it should say using gold coin. That's what we're expecting. That completes our script. However, I'm going to add something else in. Go right to the bottom, just before the last brace. That last brace should, if you scroll up, open the class. So I want it to be within the class, but I don't want it within the interact script, which is the second of last brace. I want to create a private void and then use the onDraw gizmo selected. This is preset within Unity, the naming, so the naming has to be the same. We're going to color gizmos. I'm going to use yellow. By all means, use a different color if you like. And I'm going to use that yellow to draw a wire sphere, which is just your X, Y, and Z axes, sort of circles, if you like, around those axes. It's going to be based around the transform position, so the player's position, because that's what this code is going to be attached to. And it's going to be of the distance of anything it can interact with, which is currently set to 3. So I'll have a 3-unit radius around our player. And that will tell me in the scene view what I can interact with. And this is also why I like to have 2 screens, the game view and the scene view both visible at the same time when I'm debugging. That concludes our script. Let's now add it to the player. Now I'm going to add it to the prefab. Yeah, I'm going to add it to the prefab. So interactor, add to the prefab, come out of the prefab back to the scene. You can see now that yellow overlay, anything within range I can interact with. Debug, draw ray, act as camera's position and act camera forward, so the same as the ray. I want to add a few things in. I'll add a color dot capital C magenta, and I'll add a duration of 0.5f, which is half a second. I'm going to change the forward of the draw ray to be times 10, which should do it at a distance of 10. So if the debug draw ray helps us see the ray itself, we can also write some debug logs for knowing when we've had a successful hit. And if we want to, we can put an else statement in after that ray cast. Say if we don't hit something, we can change this to maybe the ray's missed. Once you've set that up, it should work. Right, let's try this again. Let me select player so I can see that yellow circle. Go above so we can see it more accurately. There we go. So pressing F, ray hit, it's not doing anything. I get closer within range, and we had the ray hit. We had in range gold coin 2.26, picked up gold coin using gold coin. So I went through the full list. Before, it just did ray hit because I could hit it. It was returning that, but that's all it would do. And anything else I'm pressing F against doesn't do anything. Ray miss. Let's assume though I want to add the ability to walk through it and pick it up that way. I want to have that option for items. Let's add another boolean. I want to hard code it as false. Is pick up on collision. This is to say, I want to say if this is true, instead of pressing F to interact, or maybe as well as, depending on how you want to code it, I will have a collider that will determine whether this is picked up. You could have a second boolean to say, can they interact with it? using the F key. Basically, is it interactable? And then you can really have the customization of, can you pick it up on collision? Can you pick it up by pressing F? Can you do both? Can you just do one? And you have that scope. If I just have the one variable, I probably have to determine either irrespective, you can always interact with it by pressing F, or irrespective, you cannot interact with it by pressing F. And the way I could do it is simply in the use, where it says, is it consumable? In fact, even before the use, is it storable? Over here, I could do else if, you know what, before then. It's when you interact with it. Before we do anything on the interact, we could do an if statement that wraps the whole thing to say if is pickup on collision. And we want to say if it's not, so I'll put a not sign before it, and wrap the whole thing. And I'm not going to keep this, I'm just showing it for demonstration purposes. Wrap the whole thing in that. If that's false, which it is, this will continue to work. If I set that to true, interact will no longer function. That's the idea of that. I'm going to keep that if statement for a second. I'm going to copy it. So that's an option. And then it can still be called as a function. It just won't do anything when it is. Let's create a new subroutine. Let's actually go back up here and let's create a start. If we're using pickup on collision, we must make sure our is trigger is set to true. So game object, get component, get the collider. I don't know what kind of collider it is, so I'm just going to say get collider. And I'm going to say set its is trigger to true. If it hasn't got a collider, it's a problem. I don't want to create a collider because then it might not be the right size and things like that. I could force the component to have a collider. We could just allow an error to trigger if it doesn't have one. What we could do is above the class, use a require component. Type of collider. All 3D colliders should be covered by that. Collider 2D would be cover all 2D colliders. This means it should be able to be a box collider, capsule collider, or anything else. That should force one in. If it doesn't have one, it should insert one, which then means the player, the developer can set that up. Right, we're just making sure that if it's got collider, it's set to true in this situation. Now, ours is set to true anyway. I set it to true so you can walk through it. But in theory, you might set it to false so that you can't walk through an object, but you can still interact with it by pressing F. This really does need that. We can create a private void. And we've got the option of on collision enter and exit, and the 2D variants. Obviously, we don't want those. But I'm going to use an on trigger enter. It will automatically have a parameter called collider. Of type collider. It's called other. I like calling it collider or collided object or something else, but I think collider works. We want to ask the question, what have we collided with? And what we're looking for is, this is an item. So what's the item collided with? And what we're really looking for is, has the item collided with the player? Now the player should be tagged as player. So let's assume we have tagged it. And if they have, apologies, if the collider's tag is player, then we could probably destroy the object. We could use the object, I suppose that'd be the sensible thing to do. We'll use it. We could interact. We could run interact. Because interact will still go through the, do we store it, do we use it, what do we do with it once we run over it. So I think the best thing to do is run interact. Now again, we can press F and interact with it, or we can walk over it and interact with it. In either case, the item should be used. And if I wanted to stop interact as a F button working, we couldn't simply put an if statement in there. What you'd probably want to do is have a variation of this, either a different name or having a parameter passed in, and consider running it that way, where we can lock one off with an if statement to say don't run this, do run that, etc. So, but there's ways and means. I'm just going to allow both. Let's see if it works. That's the question. So gold coin item pick up on collision. I'm going to set that to true. See what happens. I'll walk through it, and it says using gold coin. Picked up gold coin, using gold coin. If I were to drag more in while I'm in this mode. Now these will be preset to be pick up on collision false. I'm going to set the outside ones to be true. And then if I walk over the first one, disappears. Walk over the second one. That disappeared even though I didn't set it. Oh, because I've set the collision. Okay. And turn it off for when I don't want it to do that. So, easy fix. Let's look at our on trigger. Slider equals tag. Yep. Let's ask the question: if that, then I'll run this. If it's false, which it defaults to, this won't run. It'll still trigger, still run through this, but it won't do anything. It won't run, the if statement will say false, so it won't run the rest. I mean, I could say if that is true and slider tag this player, but I'm not going to, just because they won't. I'm not going to. I do think that would work actually, but I'm going to leave it as is. Put a few more gold coins down first. 4 down. So the first one I'm just going to have as it was. That was the first one there, wasn't it? But first one in the row. Next one along, I'm going to set to pick up on collision. Next one is going to be pick up on collision. All of them are set to trigger. I'm just going to set it to false. That's why that one didn't work. Ticked, ticked, ticked. I had hoped it would find the aim and just do it. That works. That works when you walk through. I can only pick it up that way. Okay, so that's true, and is trigger is false. That's the condition it's looking for. It should reset that to true. Yes, it did. So it did do that time. And now I can walk through those and it picks them up. I can still interact by pressing F. So I'll walk through that one, doesn't do anything. Press F, it picks up. There we go. So we've now got a slightly extended system by adding a few extra bits in. Thank you very much. You may like to take a look at my other videos or subscribe to be notified of future content.